Find someone who's already getting the result you want and model them. You've heard that advice 100 times. It's in every business book, every podcast, every panel discussion about success. And it's definitely correct, but so many people hear the advice, they watch someone successful, maybe they copy a few visible habits, and then they're confused when it doesn't produce the same result. And of course they are, because they're not modeling, they're just imitating. And the difference between the two is the entire subject of this video. Modeling is one of the foundational concepts in NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And it's essentially a shortcut for replicating expertise without spending decades acquiring it the hard way. I'm going to explain exactly what modeling is, why it matters more than most people realize, and the actual step by step process for doing it properly. In today's video, I'm going to cover the following four things. Number one, the right definition of modeling and not just the buzzword. Second, why this matters, what's at stake if you never learn to do it properly. Three, the four-step process for modeling someone effectively. And finally, something most people never hear, where modeling has a ceiling and what's below that ceiling. But let's start with the definition first. So, modeling in the NLP sense is the process of identifying the specific internal structure that produces a result in someone else and then reproducing that structure in yourself. Notice the phrase internal structure. That's the key word, and it's the part almost everyone skips. When you look at someone who's exceptional at something, closing sales, public speaking, leading a team, making decisions, what you can see is their behavior, what they say, how they move, what they do step by step. But behavior is the visible tip of an iceberg. Underneath, below the surface, is the actual structure producing that behavior, their beliefs about what's possible, the internal pictures, sounds, and feeling they're running, what NLP calls internal representations, their physiology in the moment, and the specific sequence, the strategy their mind runs through to arrive at that behavior. Most attempts at modeling copy only the visible tip, so the behavior. And then people are surprised when copying the behavior doesn't produce the result because the behavior was never the cause, it was the output. Modeling done properly means going below the behavior, underneath it, identifying the beliefs, the internal representations, the physiology, and the strategy that are actually producing the result, and then installing that structure in yourself so that behavior becomes a natural output of your own internal structure rather than something you're performing. That's the distinction. Imitation copies the output, modeling replicates the structure that generates the output. So every skill, every capability, every way of operating that currently exists in the world was built by someone through some process, usually trial and error, refined over years or decades. Without modeling, your only two options are to either go through that same trial and error process yourself, which can take years, or to follow generic advice that was never specific to you, your situation, or the actual mechanism that produces the result. Modeling is the alternative to both of those. It's the process of compressing someone else's years of trial and error into something you can study, extract, and install, dramatically shortening your own learning curve. Imagine for a second what this means practically. If there's an entrepreneur whose ability to make fast, confident decisions consistently produces better outcome than yours, that ability didn't just appear out of the blue. It's the output of a specific internal structure, specific beliefs about decision making, a specific way of representing options internally, a specific physiology state they're in when deciding, a specific strategy, the actual sequence of internal steps that they run, often without realizing it every single time. If you can identify that structure, you don't need to spend 10 years developing your own version through trial and error. You can model it directly. This is also why take more action or just be more confident are such weak pieces of advice. They're behavioral instructions aimed at an output without any reference to the structure that would actually produce that output naturally. It's like being told to make better paintings without ever being shown how the painter actually sees color, light, and composition. Modeling is how you get access to the way someone actually sees the problem and not just what they do about it. So let's get into the actual process, which is comprised of 4 steps. So, step number 1, choose your model correctly. This sounds obvious, but it's where most people go wrong immediately. I want to model successful entrepreneurs is not good enough. Success is too broad. It's made up of dozens of different capabilities, different successful people excel at different ones. So instead, get specific about the capability you want. More like, I want to be able to make high stakes decisions as quickly and confidently as they do, or I want to be able to stay calm and clear during a difficult conversation the way they do. The more specific the capability, the more correctly you can identify the structure that produces it, and the more useful the modeling will be. It's also worth noting your model doesn't have to be someone famous, and it doesn't have to be one person. You can model a specific capability from someone you know personally, someone you've only seen in interviews, or even the structure from multiple people who share that capability. What matters is the accuracy of the capability and not the fame of the person. Step number 2, identify the internal structure. This is the core part of the process, and it requires going through each layer of the iceberg deliberately. So start with beliefs. What does this person believe about themselves, about the situation, about what's possible? That someone without this capability probably doesn't believe. If you're modeling decision making, maybe the belief is something like any decision can be adjusted later if needed, which removes the pressure of needing to get it perfectly immediately. That single belief changes everything about how the decision feels. Next, internal representations. How does this person seem to be representing the situation internally? Are they picturing multiple outcomes simultaneously? Are they running an internal dialogue or operating more from a felt sense? Are they focused on the worst case scenario or on the most likely scenario? You often have to infer and figure this out from someone, of how someone talks about the process, what they pay attention to, what they say they're looking for when they are deciding. Then physiology. How does this person hold themselves in the moment of performing this capability? So the posture, breathing, pace of movement, facial expression, physiology and the internal state are deeply linked. And physiology is often the easiest layer to observe directly, especially if you can watch the person in action. Finally, the strategy, the actual sequence. What's the order of these internal steps? Does the belief come first, creating the state, which then allows the internal representation to shift, which then produces the behavior? Or does the person change their physiology first, which shifts their state, which then changes how they are representing the situation? The sequence, the sequence matters because strategies are sequential, and replicating the steps in the wrong order often doesn't produce the same result. When you cook something, you usually follow a recipe to get the best possible result. It's the exact same here, it's the exact same process. So, step number 3, test the structure on yourself. Once you've identified the belief, the internal representations, the physiology, and the strategy, the next step is to deliberately adopt that structure yourself in a low stakes version of the situation and notice what changes. This is genuinely different from trying to act more confident. You're not performing the behavior, you're adopting the underlying belief, stepping into the physiology, running the internal representations in the sequence you identify, and then seeing what behavior emerges naturally from that structure. If the structure is accurate, you should notice something shift. The decisions should feel different. It might be feeling easier, clearer, less effortful as the structure producing the behavior has changed. If nothing shifts, that's useful information too. it usually means one of the layers wasn't identified accurately. Maybe the belief you identified wasn't actually the operative one. Maybe there's a layer underneath the one you found. This is where you can iterate the process. Step number 4, refine and integrate. Modeling is rarely perfect on the first attempt. The first version of the structure you identify is a hypothesis, a best guess based on what you could observe and gather. Refinement means going back through steps 2 and 3, adjusting the specific beliefs, representations, physiology, or strategy based on what you noticed when you tested it. Maybe the belief needs to be slightly different. Perhaps the sequence needs reordering. Maybe there's a piece of physiology you missed. Integration means continuing to run the refined structure until it stops feeling like something you're deliberately doing and starts becoming how you naturally operate in that situation. This is the difference between modeling as a one time exercise and modeling as something that actually changes your capability long term. The structure has to become automatic, which means it has to move from something you're consciously running to something that runs without conscious effort, the same way it does for the person you model. So that's the process. Choose the capability with accuracy. Identify the full structure, beliefs, internal representations, physiology, and strategy. Test the structure on yourself. Refine and integrate until it's automatic. There's a particular thing about modeling which nobody talks about, and it's the most important part of this video. Modeling can replicate someone's strategy. It can replicate their beliefs about a specific situation, their internal representations, even their physiology in that moment. But there is a layer below all four of those that modeling on its own doesn't touch, and that is your self concept, the fixed internal image you hold of who you are, what level you operate at, and what you're allowed to have or achieve. So let me give you an example. You go through the entire modeling process. You identify the belief, the internal representation, the physiology, and the strategy. You test it, it works. In the low stakes version, you feel the shift. And then you try to apply it in a real high stakes situation, and it doesn't work the same. You can model someone's pricing strategy perfectly, the belief, the internal representation of value, the calm physiology, the exact sequence they run when starting or when stating a price, and still feel that familiar hesitation when you try to charge that amount yourself. And this is because your self concept doesn't yet support operating at that level. And under real pressure, the self concept overrides the modeled strategy every single time. You can model someone's strategy perfectly and still get a different result because the strategy was never the only thing producing theirs. Their self concept was already aligned with that level of operating. Yours might not be yet. This is why modeling sometimes works beautifully in practice sessions and low stakes situations, and then quietly stops working the moment something real is on the line. This doesn't mean that modeling doesn't work. It absolutely does, for strategy, for skill acquisition, for compressing years of trial and error into something you can study and install right away. But modeling changes what you do. It gives you the access to a better strategy, a better internal representation, a more useful belief about the specific situation. What it doesn't automatically change is what's available to you in the first place, the ceiling set by your self concept. That's a completely different layer. It's not about strategy at all. It's about the subconscious image of who you are and whether that image supports operating at the level the model strategy is designed for. If modeling has ever worked for you in practice, but not under pressure, that's usually not a modeling problem. That's a self concept problem. And it requires different kind of work entirely. So, if you've ever modeled someone successfully, studied their approach, adopted their strategy, felt it click in practice, and then watch it quietly fail to work when it actually mattered, this is why. Modeling gave you the strategy, but the self concept is what determines whether that strategy survives contact with a real decision, a real price, a real moment of leadership. That is why I've built the 7 figure subconscious roadmap. It is 4 free hypnosis recordings built to update your self concept and remove the ceiling keeping you at the current level. You can download them by clicking the first link in the description. They are completely free, so you can go ahead and download them now. And if you use them together with the teachings of modeling in this video, I can 100% promise you that in 1 month, your business will be in a completely different place. So trust your gut in this moment and go ahead and take action, which you know you need to take. And I'll be looking forward to seeing and hearing about your success in the future.